So our last session is government as a platform operating in the never normal. This is a really interesting conversation. So the COVID-19 crisis is really knocking organizations and industries off balance. You know, it's shaping a new reality. That new reality is made of complexity. It's made of uncertainty, but it's also made of opportunity. Responding to the pandemic in the public sector has underscored the need for a seamless interplay of advanced capabilities and collaboration with residents, with private sector companies, and with government organizations to deliver next generation public services. So join us as we explore opportunities driven by COVID, including new capabilities, contracting and sourcing, and new ways of working. I am thrilled to announce the next speakers for this conversation because I know them all, and you're really in for a treat as we wrap up the day. So first and foremost, I'm going to bring forward Mandy Crawford. Mandy is the Executive Director for the Texas Department of Information Resources. Thank you for joining us, Mandy. Next up, I have, thank you. Next up, I have An Sellison. An is the CIO for TxDOT. Welcome, An. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Next up, I have Greg Martin. Greg is the Vice President and General Manager of the Security Business Unit at Sumo Logic. Welcome, Greg. And our panel today, you are all in for a treat. Our panel today will be moderated by Todd Kimbriel. Todd is a government senior advisor at Accenture. So I will hand it over to you, Todd, to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Appreciate that. And thanks to Mandy and An and Greg for being on our panel today. I was going to do a little introduction, but Meg has already handled that. So thank you guys for participating. I do want to say it is a very unusual moment in time for all of us as we all struggle to figure out what is the never normal, right? There's people say it's the new normal. People say it's the next normal. We prefer to think of it as never normal because the changes are philosophically and fundamentally so different from where we all were in our personal lives and our professional lives 6 months ago that coming back to that is just not a reality. So how do we adapt ourselves, particularly as government leaders, into how services are going to be consumed by citizens in the future, how to do it effectively and efficiently? And I know that the collective experience of this panel is going to shed some light on that. But what we don't want to do is just a more formal, traditional Q&A where I ask a question of a panelist and they answer that question. Instead, we thought it'd be more engaging if we did a bit of a roundtable approach, wherein we will have 4 or 5 topics, and I'll ask all panelists to contribute to a dissection of that particular topic from their relative points of view, and we'll get different perspectives and continue thoughts and add on to thoughts. And really try and paint a broad picture for the audience on a specific topic and keep it very open and wide ranging. So I'm hoping that you will be able to observe an interesting dialogue as we explore and peel back the realities of a number of different topics. So our first topic is this. COVID has changed the way government operates, forcing government to become much more like a private sector enterprise. So how did you respond from your perspectives and your positions? How did you respond to this service delivery challenge in literally an overnight fashion? So I'll open it up to the panelists. I know that Mandy, you had, by the way, I was the former CIO for the state of Texas, and my job was to do only what Amanda told me to do because she was my boss. So I'm going to start with Mandy and say, I know that from my personal experience, that we had some preparation underway, and I wonder if you could just kind of talk about that Friday to Monday experience over that weekend where we shifted from non-telework to 100% telework as an icebreaker for the topic, and then we'll all contribute.
Absolutely. Thanks, Todd. And I didn't realize that was your job description. I'm going to have to go back and see that, do everything that Mandy said. I love that.
That's right.
No. So, so at our agency, Department of Information Resources, or DIR, we had actually done on that Friday, March 13th, seeing that something was coming, decided we were going to go ahead and do a mandatory everyone in the agency telework. And certainly for us in government, telework was not the norm. It was really the exception to the rule as an agency. We had been growing and developing and pushing forward at DIR and had more robust telework plans than other agencies. But we sent everybody home on that Friday for a test, all telework day, and they never came back because, as it would turn out, that the governor issued the disaster declaration later on that afternoon, and so we went essentially from that role, from a very traditional, primarily office-based agency, to one that had to be able to continue to deliver in, as you said, this never normal, and pivot rather quickly. Now, I will say that part of it, and I would say that for all of us in IT, we are in some ways almost uniquely positioned to be able to respond to this, because we should be future looking, and we are always looking for different solutions in order to be able to adapt to whatever comes our way. So we got to work right away. And for us, from a practical standpoint as an agency, we started looking at, let's double the state Capitol complex internet capacity. We started working on that and get that done. Double our phone lines, and start working on things like just getting agencies laptops for their employees to start doing that. Those were some of the first steps that we did moving forward.
Ron, I'm sure you had some similar challenges with getting TxDOT into a distributed workforce environment and continuing to serve. How did you find that experience?
You know, we found it to be rather seamless in many ways, just because when I took the role in September of 2019, one of the key things that we were really focused on was how do we improve services overall from a delivery perspective. So some of the things that we focused very much on was the transformation of the service delivery component, some of which is because TxDOT is statewide. I mean, we have 25 districts all over the state, with a lot of those district offices having responsibility for rural sites that really have connectivity issues. So we were already working on looking at the broadband, on how we can better deliver some of the services and system access in a much better way. And a lot of that had to do with connectivity. So we were working really closely with AT&T and DIR to really increase the connectivity to pretty much all of the areas for the agency, which has about 12,500 people. The other thing we were doing is we wanted to make sure from a service desk perspective that we had available laptops. TxDOT was already very strong in leveraging mobile devices, whether that is laptops, iPhones, iPads. And so we wanted to make sure that we had plenty of surplus, regardless of whether we were entering into a pandemic or not. And so we already had some strong orders being put in for that. So the pandemic was just moving into more of a stronger telework presence. TxDOT as a whole was very strong in telework. We allowed 2 days, most of the divisions, to be able to process their operation in a telework capacity. We hadn't gone as far as we have now, which is 100% telework, but you also have to take into account, we also have construction and maintenance folks that are essential employees that are still on the roads and actually, really doing some core mission. So, I think it was very seamless. The other thing I think that was very important for us is because we had already a statewide presence and a lot of people were, could operate, and we had a strong DocuSign presence. That's the other thing is I think we undercut the importance of the automated routing of signature authority, the access of data, having data in a digital format versus being dependent on manual processing of things was very, very critical. So I'm happy to say that we were able to move, from the norm. But like you said, there's never a true norm, Todd, the norm to more of a remote situation due to the pandemic in a very seamless way that I think was just part of the normal operations of the agency.
Yeah, so that's you touched on a bunch of different points there too. I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Primarily the licensed products that you were using, the expansion of those licensed products, some of the cloud delivered services where you already had those relationships. And all of that points to sort of the strength of your partnering with the vendor community and those relationships. I know that DIR has a lot of strength in relationships with most of the technology vendors. Greg, an opportunity for you to sort of take a look at it from the vendor community side at, how how did the vendor community respond and react to these sort of changing demands and needs, right? So DIR had some expansion of services. TxDOT had some expansion of services as well, whether it was networking, whether it was software licensing. Kind of what's your perspective on, you know, how the vendor community had to step up and really partner?
Yeah, that's a good question, Todd, and very impressive. So glad you were able to make such a seamless transition. We haven't seen that across the board, unfortunately, with all the customers that we work with, both on the private and public sector. But from my standpoint, our business in cloud and security has been booming. We were very fearful come March that IT budgets would pull back across the board, and frankly, we just didn't know. And what we've seen is just a tremendous uplift, and what you already saw in cloud transformation is just being accelerated. And this is both on, like I said, on the private sector and on the public sector side as well. And, you know, net, I think that the government having to operate more like a private sector enterprise is a great thing. I think this is good for the consumers of government, the constituents. I think this is good for the government organizations themselves. It's going to help, you know, drive what we hope is a more available, more reliant, more easy to use services. And, you know, I think the most important thing that we have to do to get this right is we have to make sure that the reliability, the availability, and the security, and I mean cybersecurity, of all these new services and platforms that we're quickly rolling out, those have to be the key issues if we're going to be successful.
Yeah. And Todd,
go ahead, Dan.
I just want to add the security piece to kind of support what Greg had just said is, you know, I think the one key thing is the seamless transition from more of your normal work to the virtual was very easy. I think the one key aspect that Greg touched on is the security piece. You know, when you're trying to access, in the past, the standard was you access the data on your network within a controlled environment. What the pandemic has done is it has fundamentally changed us to realize that we may not be able to control the pipe that some of that data goes over. And so making sure that you have the appropriate security posture and configurations and pretty much protection in place for your agency is you know, so very important. And I think that's probably why you've seen, Greg, an uptick on you know, on the services requirement.
Absolutely. I mean, let's face it, workers who are on their relatively secure networks are now having to take their work computers home, share that same share that same home network, and access all their internal work services with their teenage kids who are playing games and going to school and clicking on who knows what. And it's like really pouring a clean glass of water into a dirty glass of water. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it brings all kinds of challenges that we have to deal with.
That's right. I mean, and you know, in my prior days in telecom, right, we used to call that the last mile. Nobody really worried about it prior to March. None of us really worried about the last mile with regard to employees, but now to that point, you all are dead on, right? We have to worry about what is that last mile? Is it protected? What does that home network look like? How have people stood it up? And are they really following the proper cyber protocols and whatnot? I do want to mention one thing to the audience. We do want to be interactive. So if you have a question that comes up, because we will be touching on a variety of different topics and kind of moving around. So if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we will try and work in those questions for you. So really the shifting to government as a platform, right? So I think, Mandy, you talked about, you know, some elements of service that have moved out there. On you as well, Greg, you provided some concerns about some of the things, controls, constraints that, you know, may exist. But when you think about government as a platform, it's the totality of the work that we do that really constitutes the platform. It's not just the document routing for execution. It's not just, you know, the online services for email like Office 365, but rather, you know, you get into forced elements of areas where people are not standing face to face. So how do they digitally transform? And you know, what tools. So one of the things that comes to mind is RPA, right? Robotic process automation. And how does that influence some of the manual procedures and or hopefully replace some of those manual procedures that may have existed previously? Have y'all seen anybody making forward progress on trying to really get down to that level of granularity to eliminate manual processes where there's not an enterprise solution like a DocuSign to move a transaction forward from department to department?
Yeah, we and I can speak from a TechStop perspective. Is we are looking at AI and RPA, but again, I will say that the adoption is slow, right? As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work that we're doing is really to transform just the basic service delivery to make sure that we are offering at a platform level the necessary systems that people need. So that's first and foremost. I will say that I think we are moving more towards a cloud delivery method, where I think the old days of just having on-prem infrastructure is slowly going away, because it is so easy to have the overall operational supportability with something in the cloud with a hosted solution versus IT managing it ourselves. So I think that has become our foremost, is if there's something we can push to the cloud, we're pushing to the cloud. That is the first and foremost our strategy. I think the second thing is that if there are things that we can leverage, whether it's AI or RPA, to really help with processing things expeditiously, and a lot of that is being done at the ERP level. So if we're looking at financial reporting or financial processing that is more standard and status quo, that is predictable, which RPA is all about predictability, then that's something that we are looking at. But we are having instances where those conversations are coming on with the financial area and the procurement area to see what are some standard business processes that we could leverage some of the automation. And so I think in this next year, Todd, we're going to be looking at seeing where we can implement a pilot of such that we can really focus on how can we expedite some of the financial reporting, as well as maybe processing of some of the training and things like that through some type of RPA.
Nice. Mandy, anything at DIR with RPA and AI?
Well, certainly that's something that's always been that we've been advocating for, as you know, for a couple of years, pushing on that and including it in our state strategic plan for information resources. I know from certainly agencies, one of the things we saw was chatbots. As we saw these agencies that were responding or trying to respond to tremendous volumes of calls, for example, the Texas Workforce Commission, this is unprecedented volumes and did not simply have the just even the underlying infrastructure to respond to the volume of calls, let alone the people to do that. And so that Child Support Division, I think other folks have certainly jumped on with that and looking at chatbots as a solution. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing agencies reaching out to us is on those touch points with Texans, because again, as you touched on at the beginning, Todd, the Texans and the constituents that we serve are going to expect that government can deliver services to them the way they become accustomed to the private sector doing so. The private sector has pivoted in most ways very successfully, and they're going to expect that of their government. And that's not unreasonable. And so I think really as we look at our priorities, I mean, our priorities as government need to be able to adapt to the needs and desires of Texans post-pandemic and what they're coming from out of this. So we're trying to look ahead and look at what delivery models, what are the services that really touch and make a difference. And I think there's also, there also has to be some sort of awareness with government is that, we're not just buying, pencils online or something when folks are reaching out to us, right? These are many times life and matters that really care. And so there is a certain awareness of people want to be able to be served quickly and efficiently by their government and have it in these modernized delivery models, but to still have that human element when we're dealing with folks, whether it's on public health issues or very sensitive issues concerning finances and children and all those things, the services we expect government to offer. So I think to a certain extent, there is a balance there. In trying to do what we can. And so to On's point about some of the maybe back-end automations that we can do to enhance the processes to make delivery faster while still keeping that human touch that Texans expect.
That's a really good point. And I want to kind of go back to Greg's point about, cybersecurity, and really it's all about risk, and the need to do things faster and more efficiently has really been highlighted as a result of the pandemic. So the need to sort of execute business at the pace of execute government at the pace of business is sort of the mandate, right? And so the trade-off is private sector has years and years and decades of experience exercising a risk mitigation strategy for how fast they're willing to go relative to the risk of falling down or tripping, right? And the risk of falling down and tripping could be a loss leader for a product. It could be a service that doesn't fail to meet the customer's expectations. It could be costly. It could be a cyber exposure that gets penetrated. So I kind of want to go back to Greg and kind of get your perspective on the trade-offs and the balances of how risk averse government has traditionally been versus how does government, to really deliver platform as a government as a platform, how does government have to rethink their risk mitigation strategies, or really their risk appetite, to be more effectively delivering faster services? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the government's been too risk averse. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. When it comes to cybersecurity, especially, there's been over 100 instances of ransomware attacks that have victimized both local, state government, but also the public government, and that's materialized in things like the San Francisco Bay Area public transportation system getting shut down for weeks at a time, to major hospital systems. And it's a real problem. And to tie back to your earlier question, I think this is an area where automation and AI can really help make a difference. My previous company I founded and ended up selling to Sumo Logic put to work AI against the bad guys in the cybersecurity fight. And I think that the public sector is going to start to have to take some more risks and act a little bit more like the private sector, in that they work more with startups. And that's been a huge thing that you see in the past, where startups have been a little bit too risky, even though they're driving innovation. You're not going to see a large federal government contract dealing with a very small startup creating this innovation technology, but that's actually starting to change. You're now starting to see these centers of innovation pop up, especially on the defense side. In the federal government, there is groups like DIAA and others that are popping up. There's even an Army Cyber and Technology Innovation Center now here, run in Austin, Texas, which is really exciting. So this is starting to happen every day, and the government is starting to take more risk, but we need to see more of it. We need to see more collaboration, the public sector with the private sector, both startups and the like. And, when it comes to cybersecurity, Todd, the problem changes so fast, and that's the problem. The government's been too slow to respond. The second they decide they want to take a new tact and try a new solution, well, the problem has already shifted and it's changed, and the adversaries changed tactics. So we have to get in this constant state of innovation and making that part of this new normal. And in a way, I think, COVID has helped us move faster towards that orientation.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think COVID has forced us into the reality that we can do it. It's not a technology matter. It's a licensing matter, perhaps. It's a policy matter, perhaps. But definitely, I think it's shown IT and public sector that all things are possible, right? Where there's a dire need and an urgent need. So one of the characteristics that I think of government as a platform. One of the characteristics that I think is most evident in that environment is what we're all seeing in our personal lives today with touchless forms of payment. If you're in that 25 or 50% of the population that are allowed to be in a restaurant now, they're no longer handing you a bill. They're handing you a device, or they're giving you a barcode, and you're doing everything on your smart device. So this element of touchlessness, right? On the one hand, the emotional quotient that we all have as citizens of Texas is we want to be touched by our government in a positive way, but by the physical nature of it, we really don't want to be touched. So, I guess the question is touchless government really possible? And what do you think about that? And what form and nature should it take? And how fast should we strive to get there?
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in, and I think yes. I think it is, like with the caveat before where I talked about, I think we also have to be cognizant of the emotional side for some of those services that comes in. But I think it's absolutely possible. One of the things that Todd, as I know you know, but we've been working on at DIR for a while is it's an online portal called Texas by Texas that definitely, yay, Texas by Texas, also known as My Government My Way, or My Government Todd's Way, we'll call it. Which is, again, it's a single touch point for people to interact with their government. And so through this application, which is live now, and we have different licensing applications that are already on the portal, but it creates a single unique identifier for someone who's participating in that program. So a Texan can go on there, you create your identifier, and you can renew your license. And now what we're doing is building out and rolling and adding more government agencies to this platform. So for example, right now we're working with the Department of Motor Vehicles on vehicle registration. And that to us is going to be really a huge, what do you call it, the anchor tenant in that platform, that we can ultimately, the platform can extend to local governments. So you could pay your utility lines, potentially pay your tuition bills online, go and maybe do public information requests, all those things that can go through this application. One of the greatest things I just think, again, as a Texan and a taxpayer wouldn't it be wonderful to change your address in one place and have it go all the way across government so you don't have to keep submitting these over and over? So that is part of our vision for the future of government, and we're working to roll that out to be able to provide that to Texas.
So the idea of that, a single sort of portal or account, if you will, for a citizen, I mean, that brings a lot of different elements of concern, for one, right? From a golden record perspective, the idea that there would be no matter how behind the scenes it is, the vision that there could be a golden record of a citizen. How does the citizenry react, constituents react to that? How do we protect it from a cyber perspective? Greg, what are your thoughts on that aspect of really trying to move to a touchless form of government? Any concerns about that?
So I would say that it depends on the mission of the agency. I don't necessarily know if, from a constituency perspective, the TxDOT's ever going to move to a touchless, because the main mission of our agency is the construction and safety of roads. And so, I mean, to Mandy's point, I think if you were processing something online, I think it's great, and we should. So I think some of the trials and tribulations that I know I felt as a Texan is sometimes needing to get something done and waiting for a person to process, like driver's license. I think that's something, if we can move towards more of a touchless processing where we can renew our driver's license and get the verification in place through a touchless process, I think that is something that, as a Texan, I'm all for. But for us, looking at the mission of TxDOT, I think we can move more from a back-end processing, like I said, with financial reporting, financial processing, procurement processing, things like that, internally using some type of automation. I think that's great. And I think we're going to see improvements in the service levels, as well as the performance of how quick things get turned around. Now, from providing our mission which is connecting you with Texas, that's a little harder to try to do touchless, but I think there may be components of it. I just think that from a cybersecurity perspective, I would be concerned more. And I'm not saying that I think it's a great mission. And I think, moving towards more of a, single portal where you can do payment processing if you have one ID, and if you're going to, whether it's, parks or whether it's DMV or whatever, having one portal that I can go to pay all my fees is a phenomenal thing for the state of Texas. I just think we need to be aware that the sensitivity of that data, having been through a ransomware just recently. And, some people would, similar to some of the things that Greg has said, some people would very much not want to share that. I think for us, we went through a ransomware. And I think there was a lot of great things that we learned from it, as well as I think there were abilities to influence the culture of it, where I think in the past you have employees who go, what is security? I don't need to worry about security. It doesn't impact me. And I think during a ransomware, you see, first and foremost, it impacts you operationally. It can bring you down. And depending on how fast you come up, it really can impact and disrupt your life overall. So I think we need to be cognizant of the security impacts. We need to be cognizant of the type of data that is in there and where it resides. And then what are we doing to safeguard it? Because I think any exposure of that, I think would be a huge detriment to any Texan.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really critical to make sure it's all secured. But when you think about this government as a platform, all of the elements that we're discussing, all of these topics, all of the points have to come together into a single resilient, defensible platform of service that makes it easy for citizens to consume their government services at all levels, right? I mean, certainly the example that Mandy pointed out with getting local government service as well, right? When you're standing on, it's not unusual to see a city portal where you report a pothole, right, with a smartphone and you get a GPS location. Well, that's great if you know that you're standing on a city road, but what if you're on a county road or a state road, and you try and report it to that city, right? With right. the government as a platform, the intelligence behind that can that's identify right. that you're reporting a pothole and route that pothole report to the correct jurisdiction, right? So that vision down the road. So we got a couple of questions that came in. One of them is, what do you think are some tools and resources that we could recommend for the audience to stay up to date on the latest news that's coming out for these initiatives and the direction that government is going?
Well, certainly for us through DIR, I'd recommend you visit our website, and particularly under our contract and services page, and look at our current contracting initiatives, and then sign up for some of our sourcing newsletters. So one of the things, in addition to, we have the services we offer through our suite of shared technology services. We also have a cooperative contracts program of IT goods and services. There's about 750 different contracts, and it's a multi-billion-dollar a year program. And so that's where we leverage the buying power of Texas to negotiate with companies to have agreements and contracts that are already ready to go. It's the easy button, and all eligible government customers, both in Texas and outside of Texas, can use those contracts then. And so I highly recommend that anyone who is interested, including those of y'all in startups, look for those initiatives, see what's out there, and stay up to date on the news. We want more active participation in our programs, and we would love to have some of y'all compete for the different contracts that we have out there.
And I'd like to also make a plug for TASC, which is the Texas Association. I'm going to try to make sure I get the acronym correctly. Texas State System Computing Association, or State Computing, and I'll stop there. But TASC is very much a strong networking organization that is made up of a lot of vendors in the government space. When someone's asking about what's the latest news, what technology is right now being leveraged by different state agencies, like Mandy was talking about earlier, I think TASC is a great venue in order to share that information and get that information. And we encourage, new vendors to come in and just, if nothing else, network with your peers so that you can really seek to understand what's going on in the industry.
Greg, how about your perspectives on that? So you're in the vendor community. You have the opportunity to sort of look at government from the other side and see what opportunities, how those are understood, how they get cultivated. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with Amanda. I think that, you're doing a startup, you need to plug in and understand what opportunities are out there. So finding different sites, whether it's for a different state local governments, if it's for federal governments, go look at the RFPs, go look at the projects that they have out there. This is all public information. So you can, sign up or go to different websites and view all of these orders that are coming out. And you can see what are the investments that each governments are looking to make. And they spell it all out there for you. And if you're wondering, what is that next opportunity that I should be working on, or how do I pivot my startup to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of the public sector, it's a great way to start.
I think so. And I'm just going to jump on that a little bit more, is make sure when you are reaching out to government, it's so important to tell your user story and make your business case. Don't just talk IT, shiny things, buttons, all that. Make them understand, because you have to remember where government is coming from. We've already talked about, again, one, they're risk averse. We have strict budgets, extremely strict budgets that are outside of our control. And also remember, with state government, the budgetary cycle that we go through is very prolonged, and it's not necessarily conducive to IT spending. By the time we have an idea that we want something, then we have to think about what it costs, then we have to ask for it, then the legislature has to meet, then we actually get the money. We could be 4 years down the road, and to Greg's point, that technology is old and over and done with. So also think of things again in have a good user story. Nobody, as one of my colleagues says, no one wants to be first, but no one wants to be last. And be able to show in concrete examples how you can increase productivity, save money, continue to deliver services, be secure, be scalable, resilient, because that is what government is looking to be in the future. So you've got to be able to hone in on that and not just have a cool, shiny thing, but have a reason behind it, why government wants to do business with you.
There's another question that came in is about government organizations, and what are your all's thoughts about other government organizations other than your own? And are there examples out there of organizations that you think are really doing it right? For those, what should local government in particular, but what should they be thinking about right now? They all have very limited budgets. State government is very different than local government. The budget cycles are different. The budget processes are different. But what are some of the things that that you think they might want to be thinking about?
Yeah, and I can kick that one off. I think that just talking to, we deal a lot with the city of Austin and different entities. I think the key areas that they're going to be talking about is very much, the cybersecurity. That is paramount to all of us, whether it's state or local. I think another big major area is big data, and how do we pull, like Todd was saying earlier, about being able to collect all of the data and be able to, do accurate reporting, accurate either diagnostics, remediation, whatever it is, it's having one source of information, because we have such a prevalent environment of different systems. And then I think the other thing is reduce operational overhead. So I think, how can you look at your infrastructure, rationalize, what it takes to implement and support that, and then what is the best avenue to reduce that overhead so that you can actually make more of the budget that you have.
Mm-hmm. I think that absolutely, and I think that whether you're an NGO or your standard governmental body, I think we always be looking to in working with them and emphasizing the point that IT powers your business. IT powers the business of government, powers the business of NGOs if you're trying to reach out. And so see how in looking to technology as a force multiplier to be able to deliver to whoever your constituency is. And that's something that I think everybody should be looking more towards when they're planning out their budget cycles. And I love On's thoughts around data as well. I think that is another thing on government. The government's a little bit late to the data game, but they're getting there, and they're understanding the importance of it, and just the importance of it's always been understood that the data needs to be secure, and you need the security piece was there, but it's really the governance, the analytics, the management that goes behind it, and using the data to be able to serve constituents better. So getting a handle on the data that you have is important.
Absolutely. I just, want to hammer down those same topics. If I was creating a startup right now and I was selling to the government, the hottest areas, of course, cybersecurity, big data, driving intelligence from your data, right?
Yep.
Analytics. How do we turn that data into value? Cloud computing, SaaS is the biggest growing area in IT and tech right now for both private and public sector. You can't really go wrong. But thinking outside the box a little bit, there's some big problems that are coming out of COVID, and one of those are being accelerated by COVID is this shift to knowledge workers, and we're going to have thousands and thousands of people in Texas, in Austin, and in the U.S. More broadly, that really are going to need help making a career shift and learning, IT and learning different systems, and how do I do my job that I did manually now digitally. And I think there's huge opportunities, whether you're creating a nonprofit or you're creating a startup that helps with education for the workforce. There's some really cool opportunities out there where you can do a lot of good and help people get back into the workforce. And, all of these really hard issues that we talked about, these are all right problems to solve. And we're going to need, a lot of smart people to work on these issues.
That's a really, really good point, Greg. I'm glad you brought that up. Right. So I know I heard of there's a function through Amazon called Mechanical Turk that provides Uber-like manpower staff log capability, where workers sign in at whatever point in time they choose. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning. They decide they want to work for 45 minutes. They are trained to do certain transactions. Maybe it's review a video and provide a description of the video. Maybe it's pick a color, whatever it might be. And they do that, and they log in and they work for 45 minutes at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they do 15 transactions, and they get paid 75 cents a transaction. New York State, I know that they had a problem with snowplow drivers. Believe it or not, snowplow drivers were the traditional form of paying employees. And in upstate New York, they pay them a full year salary, which is the traditional government FTE model. And they were very busy for 3 months out of the year. And the other 9 months of the year, they're sitting around really not doing very much. And so they've adopted, in some, use cases like that, a slightly different strategy. And I wonder if there is not an opportunity to more broadly think about transaction workers in government, in general administrative services, and actually go to that pay per transaction model, and get away from that concept of a fully paid FTE, fully burdened, and look at that as a way to perhaps start to reskill the workforce for working in the current environment in a way that's very consistent with the way many people lead their personal lives nowadays. I think that's an excellent point. How do we collectively go about reskilling the workforce, under these circumstances? It's a strategy. How do you go about shifting that, going to managed services and cloud services? You could have an IT organization that traditionally has pulled the wires, built the infrastructure, managing and monitoring the blinking lights. But as you really shift to the cloud, you don't need those skills anymore. And those have to be retrained into other more enabling skills. So what's the challenge? How do you do that in your organizations, right? Definitely a need. So Mandy, you guys have anything sort of in mind right now or top of mind for how your workforce is going to shift into this sort of more enabling skill set that really, frankly, is much more needed?
I'm looking at Mandy's face. I would say that I'll be honest with you. We've been running, and so we went from pandemic, and I think for TxDOT, we went to a ransomware, and then now we're just starting to kind of ease up. I will say that it is fundamentally changing the way we operate. Do we have anything at TxDOT? No, I think one of the areas that we're focusing is not necessarily enablement, but of the technology or the knowledge, as you guys were talking about. It's more, how do we introduce less tenured folks into the environment, because we're still struggling. And again, going back to what Greg keeps saying, I think in some ways government is behind, but it is trying to introduce the new future of state agency workers, and how do we recruit that? And that's really been more our focus.
Yeah, good. Well, I see that Meg is on the stage with us now. So I'll thank you guys very much for giving us your time and your thoughts and sharing your afternoon with the audience. And Meg, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Todd. Just to reiterate, thank you again, Mandy, On, Todd, and Greg, for sharing some of your expertise with us. You know, On really talked about how TxDOT was already looking at ways to increase connectivity before the pandemic and making sure that they had equipment available for everyone. And then also the importance of creating data in a digital format and moving from the norm to a remote working situation. And really a lot of those, you know, that groundwork that she had put in place enabled a fairly easily and seamless transition from normal work to virtual. Also talked about lessons learned from ransomware and the ability to affect the culture, you know, specifically making sure that state employees and government workers cared about cyber attacks and they understood the importance of it. Mandy with DIR talked about RPA and automation as being much more relevant, including chatbots, especially with Texas Workforce Commission, enabling a chatbot that enabled them to answer Q&A from residents, understanding, you know, there was an unprecedented demand on unemployment insurance and how can the agency be more responsive to residents. Greg talked about how the vendor community can step up, especially around security, you know, also around things like sharing the network now with your teenagers. Greg, I loved your comment around pouring a clean glass of water into a dirty glass of water. That was really relevant to me. You also talked about how government has to get into a constant state of innovation. And COVID has, you know, really kind of forced us into that reality. You know, IT at least can do it. Maybe the policy lags a little bit, but IT can do it. And then Todd, you know, talked about the last mile. What does your home network look like? Are your employees following cyber protocol? And executing government at the pace of business is really the expectation. Also that new kind of touchless process, you know, how government enables a touchless, seamless process. So thank you all again for joining us. That wraps up the COVID-19 innovation track. So thanks again to our sponsor, Accenture. And of course, the Austin Startup Week for bringing us this virtual event. So now is the time to head over to the Startup Crawl. This is really exciting. The Startup Crawl will be hosted in our virtual platform. It's called Sococo. You should have received an email from Sococo with your credentials and information on how to log into a platform. There's also a video available that we're going to show right after this. So stay in touch and stay connected to watch that video. So instead of shuttles this year, we're going to crawl virtually from table to table. You can drop off a resume, you can hear pitches, you can meet some founders, and you can learn all about what the Austin startup scene has to offer. So be sure to check your email, watch the video, and we will see you in the Startup Crawl. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great afternoon.
Startup Crawl in Sococo. I'm going to give you a really quick tour to show you how to plug in and make the most of it. This is our custom map in Sococo, and when you land here, you should be in the lobby, which is over the Capital Factory logo, and you can see a whole bunch of people in there now, and it's going to be a lot more full by the time that you come in here. And this map shows all the different startups that you can visit and different partners and sponsors at the bottom in their own little rooms. There's a help desk on the left where you can go to get, if you need to ask questions about how to use Sococo, and I'm going to show you real quickly how to make the most of it. So you'll see lots of different tables. Each of these little tables in the letters represent different startup organizations and startups. You can see the S is full of great groups like Techstars and Women at Austin and Bunker Labs and UT McCombs and Mass Challenge and the Entrepreneurs Foundation and the New Draper House. And then as you go across, you'll see other partners like the Texas Military Department and Army Applications Lab and AFWorks and Gwin Partners, but also lots of startups like Gemba and Cratejoy and MadeBot and StoryFit and many, many more across across all of the map. And then along the bottom, you can see a room dedicated to fundraising where you can go talk about fundraising with some of our venture associates and partners. And then other sponsors like Microsoft, Northrop Grumman, CACI, IBM, SAIC, Baker Bots, BAE Systems, IDA Ireland, and the University of Texas at Dallas. So real quickly, how do you use Sococo? How do you make this work? First thing is you want to set up your profile so people know who you are. And to do that, come here and click edit your profile. And the first thing I would do is on your Sococo name, I would change it and I would put your first name and then your company name. So when people hover over your avatar, they know who you are. So I'm going to put Josh from Capital Factory, or maybe I'll even just do Josh at Capital Factory. So that everyone will know who I am. And then next up, you've got your initials. That's all fine. And you can change your color. I like being orange. I'm already orange, but you can change your color as well. So now when people come and they see me and they hover over it, they see Josh at Capital Factory. So they know who they're talking to. So now, how do you figure out who to go, where to go, and who to talk to? Well, you can see the names of the different startups over their different tables. And then on some of the tables, you'll see little arrows pointing to content. So like here's Mass Challenge's booth, and I can click to register for the Mass Challenge 2020 Awards, and it'll bring me to their website. Some have videos and other information, PowerPoints or slideshows, different info you can hover over to learn more about the company before you go visit. But then the main thing you came here for is to talk to people, to meet people. And so what you really want to do is click on each of these and go around just like you would in person to visit each booth and to talk to the people there to find out more about what they're working on. And the first thing you might do is just listen. You might just click and listen. So I'm going to click. I see a bunch of people over here in the Gemba booth. Gemba, I've been hearing about in the news lately. They've just raised a big round of funding. Actually, of course, not just in the news. I'm an investor, but you might have heard about him in the news. And really great company, started by Henrik. I can see Henrik's in the booth now because if I hover over him, I can see it. And then I can see a few other people too. And I know they're active because they're flashing. So when you talk, your little avatar flashes. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go click on Gemba. And when I click on it, that jumps me into that room. And then, where you go, you can see I've now got Kevin and Natalie and Alex in here talking. Now, they can't hear me yet. So I'm going to come up here and turn on my audio by clicking the little green button here. Hey, everybody. And I can turn on my video too. And now they can see me, and all the four of us are here in a room together. And so everybody that's in one room can hear and can see each other if you turn on your audio and video. It's up to you. And there's Henrik. Hey, Henrik. So now they're all in the room together. We can talk and chat. And then also, if I go up here in the left-hand corner, there's this chat in Gemba, and you can see it opens up the chat. And that's where I can, send a message, or, someone might post a link or something like that to gemba.com. But as I said, there's also the links in the room, and I can drag the map up here to see what's in there. I can zoom in too to come in closer and see both who's in the room and what I want to click on. So thanks everybody. I'm going to pop into another room, but just showing everybody around. All right, so come over here to the Capital Factory table. This is where I can ask questions about Capital Factory, how to join, things like that. There's a help desk. Here you can find information about how to use Sococo, and we'll have somebody there to talk to you. But like I said, the most important thing is just clicking around, looking at the different startups, finding out who's here, and talking to people. And when you come in here for the event, every one of these tables is going to have lots of people at it for you to go talk to. And I'm really excited to see how it goes. So please come join us for the 20th startup crawl ever, but the first one ever virtually here in Sococo.